let's talk a little bit about creative for a few minutes. The U.S. Hispanic market is a different consumer segment. A lot of companies and organizations, municipalities in the U.S. do try and take whatever's working with the general market and simply translate. Remember, we just talked about that difference between translating and transcreating. Well, when you think about the creative, again, there are factors that make these consumers different. Just like the filters we talked about in the very first slide, there are historical things you have to take into consideration, contextual, geographic. There are all these things that come together to help you really make a campaign that will resonate with this community or that will fall flat with this community. So, what you want to do is establish some cultural connectivity. That's really the first step. So how do I go about doing that? Some of the things that are important, and Victoria, I'm going to have you weigh in. I know you've got a great example, an anecdote to share with the group, but identity cues are important when we think about the look, the feel, the tone, the words that we choose for a most effective outreach among Hispanics here in the area. We want to take into consideration values, traditions, their country of origin is important. Their degree of acculturation, their language preference, all of those things are really important. In fact, here's another vocabulary lesson for you today, Marianismo. Is anybody familiar with what Marianismo is? It's the female equivalent, or the feminine equivalent of machismo. Everybody know what machismo is? Okay, so Marianismo really talks about, from a cultural perspective, the role that a woman plays in her home. Much like we kind of all chuckled with, oh yeah, we know about machismo. It can be the worst, but it's sometimes a really good descriptor of the role that a man plays in a more traditional, less acculturated Hispanic household. Marianismo, the feminine equivalent of that. And Victoria, tell us a little bit about the bleach story.
One of the things that I wanted to explain is that for a lot of Hispanics, white, very white clothes and shoes and things like that are a sign of pride, of a good housekeeping, a good wife, a good mother. It's not, they are not thinking, I want this to be absolutely clean and disinfected. I want my son, my daughter, my husband to look impeccable, and that they know that they have a mom and a wife in a house that's taking good care of them. So it's a completely different view of what we might be, or general market, or a lot of people might be thinking, I wanted the germs, the bacteria that just kill everything. It's not necessarily that's the thought that's going on.
So even though we're thinking about how to connect in the most culturally relevant way, I also want you to think about, at the end of the day, there are more aspects of this consumer than just their ethnicity. So remember that. This is not just about appealing to their ethnicity, but appealing to all aspects of this community as consumers. And talking about ethnicity just made me think of something that I will share with you real quickly. I don't know how many of you are aware that the label Hispanic is not a racial designation. The Census Bureau has 6 racial designations by which they measure the population here in this country. Hispanic is not one of them. So this may be some of your aha moments, so pay attention. You can be white and be Hispanic. You can be black and be Hispanic. You can be Asian. You can be Pacific Islander. You can be Native American Indian. Those are some of those 6 racial categories. But at the end of the day, Hispanic, being Hispanic, Hispanicity is about culture and ethnicity. It is not about race. I can look like anybody and still self-identify as being Hispanic. In fact, individuals who take, any of you have been to Peru, are probably well aware of that disconnect, because there is an incredibly large Japanese and Chinese population, believe it or not, in Peru. So you will frequently run into somebody named, Julio Fujimori, for instance, and they could not be more Hispanic because they're Peruvian, but they still have that Asian racial relationship. I'm going to talk for a moment about enculturation, assimilation, and acculturation. So enculturation, That, much like we talked about a few minutes ago, that your native language, you'll also have you'll always have an emotional tie to that language. Same is true with enculturation. That refers to the culture in which you were born. So this is the culture that you grew up in, that you associate with wonderful things of your childhood, your mom, your grandma, your dad, that sort of thing. So enculturated, that's a hard thing to ask a consumer to part with. Even if you bury it, at the end of the day, you will still always have this really deep psychological connection with your first culture. So that's enculturation. Acculturation, on the other hand, is the process by which an immigrant adopts and adapts. So they adopt some of the best traditions and cultures and values out of their new homes, traditions, cultures, and values, but without sacrificing those things that make them unique in terms of their country of origin, the things that they celebrated in Mexico or in Guatemala or in Peru. So it's this great idea of adopting and adapting. You're pulling the two together. Assimilation, our third word, is what many of you are probably much more familiar with in terms of maybe your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents who may have immigrated to this country and the process that they went through. Now, if we think back 150, 200 years, think about what that process looked like for an immigrant. You got on a boat, you came to this country, tough journey, a lot of people didn't survive. Once you got here, you found an environment that was probably not nearly as embracing of diversity as we are today, and we're certainly not perfect by any means, but we've made a lot of progress in terms of accepting people who have visible differences. That was not the case 150 years ago. So assimilating is really about leaving all of those values, traditions, your cultural behind, and really adopting everything American. So do you see the difference between assimilation and acculturation? And on top of all of that, the role of technology today has really made a difference in the immigrant experience. And the reason for that is, remember we just talked about 200 years ago, you got on a boat, you came to this country, you never had any type of a communication channel with the family that you left behind in Ireland, in Italy, in Germany, in any of those countries that your great-great-grandparents may have immigrated from. So when they left, they left. There wasn't a lot of communication. They weren't going back home. Now, fast forward to today, I can instant message my family in Mexico. I can text them. I can call them on my cell phone. I can get online and book a ticket home this weekend if I wanted to. So do you see suddenly how technology has changed the immigrant experience dramatically? So when you hear people start to talk about why aren't immigrants, and not just Hispanic immigrants, but Asian immigrants, immigrants of all types, why aren't they assimilating like immigrants did 100, 150 years ago? Hopefully, you'll have a little bit different perspective now when you're a part of that conversation. If for no reason other than technology, the immigrant experience today is different. And we have to take that into consideration when we're marketing to Hispanics.